Diving became Nick's passion back in high school, when his father started taking him to local lakes and rivers. Of course, practicing in the sea was the best option, but that required a substantial amount of money, something Nick didn't have, especially after his father, Andrew, died during one of their trips. On that fateful day, Nick didn't go with his father because he had university entrance exams. But Andrew decided to take the risk and explore a lake that the locals called Witch's Pit by himself. No one really knew why the lake had such a strange name. Some of the old-timers said that a dozen witches had once been drowned there. It happened over a century ago, and since then the lake was considered cursed. According to their stories, before the witches were killed, their lips were sewn shut with a coarse needle, along with a silver coin blessed with holy water placed in their mouths. This was supposedly done while they were still alive, and afterward the witches were thrown into the lake with a heavy weight tied to their feet. This tale had been passed down through generations, growing with rumours and embellishments along the way. One of Andrew's acquaintances claimed that his great-grandfather used to say that after the witches drowned, air bubbles continued to rise to the surface for 3 days. The locals insisted that the witches could breathe underwater for all that time. How it happened, nobody knew. In those days, people were deeply superstitious and didn't believe in natural sciences. Andrew, on the other hand, thought it was just gases escaping from the bodies, which had bloated like barrels. He was intrigued by the legend of the silver coins and thought they might still be at the bottom. If they were as old as rumoured, selling them could bring in a good sum. "Dad, that's all well and good, but the lake is deep. You can't do this without help. You need someone to handle the rope from the boat while you go down," Nick said. "Son, I've gotten pretty good at this. I'm in great shape. Why would I need backup or ropes? It's only 5 or 10 meters deep. No problem. I'll get down there quickly and find those cursed coins, though I still think it's all just a story. At best, they might have filled their mouths with dirt, and sewing their lips shut wasn't necessary," Andrew replied, waving him off. Nick just shook his head. He had always been superstitious, fascinated by books about the supernatural. He didn't believe in vampires or ghouls, but he did entertain the idea of something otherworldly and inexplicable. Andrew died on a warm summer morning, when no one could have imagined that an experienced diver would damage his oxygen tank during a dive and be unable to make it back to the surface alive. He was found by accident when his body floated to the surface hours later. A local had spotted the distinctive wetsuit and immediately called the police. Andrew was lying face up on the water, but when rescuers turned him over, they were horrified. His eyes were gone. His tongue was missing, and there was an old silver coin in his mouth. No one could say for sure what had happened at the lake. Some thought it was the work of a serial killer who had killed Andrew on shore and then dumped him in the lake. But Nick was convinced that his father's death was connected to Witch's Pit. A year and a half had passed, but Nick couldn't shake the idea of returning to that lake. He didn't want to go alone, though. For safety, he decided to take his friend Matt, who wasn't a diver but could hold the safety line. Plus, Nick could give a signal if anything went wrong. Matt's father had a good boat equipped with a small winch, which Nick found promising. It was one thing to haul a rope by hand, another to use a machine. Nick didn't know what he might encounter at the bottom of the lake, but he knew he had to be careful. He couldn't bring a weapon underwater, so he settled for a spear gun. It wasn't much in case of danger, but it was better than nothing. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Matt asked. To be honest, the whole idea made Matt uneasy, but Nick was determined. "Someone killed my father, Matt. And I think it was those witches buried at the bottom of the lake. Matt shook his head. And what are you planning to do? Are you a ghost hunter now? Even if there's something down there, which I seriously doubt, you're not going to take it on alone. But there was no convincing Nick. He hadn't told Matt that ever since his father's tragic death, he'd been having the same dream, diving to the lake's bottom, finding silver coins one by one. And then, just as he was about to pick up the last coin, his father would appear, alive, healthy and beckoning him deeper. Each time Nick would wake up, drenched in sweat. The dream was always the same, without any variations or continuation. He'd studied every detail of it, even memorized the underwater landscape. The two friends decided to make their trip on a weekend. Matt borrowed his dad's boat, saying they wanted to fish. Nick filled the oxygen tanks, checked the safety line and clipped it to his belt. Then he donned his wetsuit, put on his mask and began his descent. Before fully submerging, he gave Matt a thumbs up, signaling that everything would be okay. Nick knew he was taking a risk, but he felt he had no choice. The nightmare would haunt him until he faced whatever was at the bottom of that lake. The water was cold, fed by springs deep below. The area was uninviting. The lake was surrounded by dense woods with only one narrow road for car access, which they used to bring the boat. Nick sank lower and lower. So far, everything was fine, just like hundreds of times before. He was reassured by the safety line tied to his waist. One pull, and Matt would start the winch and pull him up, along with whatever he wanted to bring back. At 16 feet, Nick felt the characteristic pressure of the water depth. He needed to go even deeper, 23, maybe 33 feet. It was hard to tell since he couldn't see that clearly in the dream. His father had said there was no part of the lake deeper than 33 feet. Nick passed 23 feet, then 26, 29. The marker showed 33 feet. Though Nick couldn't see it, only Matt on the boat could. Nick continued to 39 feet, then toward 49. Matt stood above, not believing his eyes. He didn't know what to do. Wanting to ask if Nick was all right, he gave the line a gentle tug, a signal that if everything was okay, Nick should return a single tug. Nick responded with one pull, and Matt relaxed. Everything seemed fine, and Nick continued downward. It felt like some kind of trance. He knew it was either an illusion or some underwater hallucination. There couldn't be such depths in this lake. Matt counted past 98 feet. He began to worry. They only had 164 feet of line. At this rate, Nick might never reach the bottom. Damn it, why couldn't he just stay home? And he dragged me into this. God forbid he dies down there. They'll blame me for not pulling him up, Matt muttered. Nick, meanwhile, felt completely out of his element, except for the darkness that had engulfed him. To see anything, he switched on his powerful flashlight, cutting through the water like a laser blade from some distant galaxy. Then things got strange. Nick spotted shapes in the distance, large fish-like figures. He knew carp that size weren't uncommon here, so there was no need to panic. But as the figure drew nearer, Nick froze. It was a drowned woman wearing a tattered dress. She swam like a fish, her sunken eyes locked onto Nick. Her mouth was sewn shut with coarse thread, and Nick realized the villagers' stories about Witch's Pit were true. When more of the witches appeared, Nick's nerves started to fray. They surrounded him like a school of decayed mermaids, their twisted hands reaching for him. Over the years, their bodies had grown grotesque formations, but their mouths remained sewn shut. Some of them even had webbing between their fingers resembling hideous flippers. Deep down, Nick knew what was happening wasn't real. This is just my imagination. A pressure difference. I've never gone this deep before. I just need to pull the line and have Matt haul me up. Nick thought. But as he reached for the line, the witches closed in, preventing him from giving the signal. They tugged at his legs, grabbed for his oxygen tank and tried to tear off his flippers or mask. Though they couldn't laugh, Nick saw the triumph in their hollow eyes. In that moment, Nick remembered the spear gun strapped to his back. He tried to swim away, to create some distance, but the witches weren't about to let him go. The largest one swam right up to him and gripped his neck. In a panic, Nick pulled out the spear gun and fired, hitting her point blank. The impact sent her drifting away, and the water quickly clouded with some kind of fluid, blood, pus or ichor. Nick couldn't tell. He didn't care. He yanked the line with all his strength, signaling Matt to pull him up. Matt reacted instantly, and soon Nick shot toward the surface, propelled by the winch. He didn't have time to reload the spear gun, and to his horror, the witches swam after him, moving even faster than the winch could pull him. They latched onto the line and began dragging it down. Nick's heart nearly stopped in fear. On the boat, Matt was thrown into the water as the winch was violently torn from its mount and the boat capsized. Desperately trying to swim to shore, Matt had no chance. Something or someone grabbed him and dragged him under. Matt died before the witches pulled him into the depths. Nick, meanwhile, found himself trapped, the heavy winch now lying tens of meters below, but the free line only stretched 30 meters. He was stuck like a buoy, unable to move. Soon his oxygen would run out and he'd drown. The witches continued to circle him like a macabre infernal carousel. He couldn't float to the surface as the winch tied to his waist weighed him down like an anchor. Nick tried several times to unclip the line, but it was no use. His oxygen was running out. Unable to hold on any longer, he closed his eyes and prepared to die. The last thing he saw was the face of one of the witches. Nick was found 3 days later lying on the lake's shore. His diving gear was gone and he was covered in wounds that experts easily recognized as human bite marks. Next to him lay 12 silver coins, the very ones sewn into the mouths of the drowned witches. Fortunately, Nick was alive, though he was severely weakened by blood loss and prolonged exposure to the water. When he regained consciousness, he told the doctors that the witches had saved him. In return, he had torn the threads from their mouths, freeing them from the curse placed on them so long ago. Nick didn't know why they chose to spare him, but he had managed to break their bonds and give them peace at the bottom of the lake. Afterward, he never went diving again, terrified of what else he might encounter underwater. It's said that ever since then Nick is afraid of even a bathtub, only washing under a shower. And he never told anyone that, to keep him alive, the witches had pressed their lips to his, giving him precious breaths of air. Please write in the comments, support the video with a like, and of course subscribe to the channel. If it's not difficult for you, I will be pleased. You can also share this video with your friends. They will probably also be interested.